Anyway, we've got a very distinguished professor as our guest tonight.
But I mean, we're talking about Clive Palmer.
He's a professor.
And where's he a professor?
He'll tell you.
Well, I'm going to ask him.
Introduce him fairly and properly.
OK, I'll do that. Well,
and he's a Queenslander.
Everybody fairly
and
properly.
he's a Queenslander.
Indeed. Well, in our Canberra studio is Clive Palmer, and I must say I have not had more calls about an interview ever from the shows that we've done. And so obviously that people are getting very excited about this.
Yeah, they weren't interested in listening to you, they want to hear from Clive.
Well, they're certainly not interested in listening to you. The
Can we
public
hear
speak
Clive?
all the time. We're going to hear him.
Can we?
Can I just say welcome to Clive Palmer?
It's great to be here, Richo. Good on you, Alan. You're a great guy.
Oh, see, it started already.
That's it.
The
you
love
got your
in.
first throw. Come on.
The love in. All right. Well, actually, Alan said to introduce you as Professor Clive Palmer. Now, I keep reading you're not a professor. Are you a professor or not? And if so, where are you a professor?
Well, I was a professor at Deakin University and then at Bond University, but when I got elected to Parliament, none of the universities wanted me anymore. You can't be a professor and be in Parliament, apparently, because they think you're sort of biased. So I'm not a professor, but I'm a citizen of Australia and I love it.
Well, I don't think there's much dispute about you being a citizen.
One of the darker moments was the Peter Credlin affair, when you said, why should Australian citizens and businesses be taxed and working women discriminated against just so the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff can receive a massive benefit when she gets pregnant. Do you regret those comments?
I do on a personal nature, and I sent her an apology the very first thing in the morning. I didn't mean any personal harm to her, but what I was trying to highlight was that a woman as smart, as successful as she is, and earning a great salary, would get a very large benefit out of the paid parental leave if she was in private industry. And of course, another woman, a stay-at-home mum, would get nothing. Someone on a farm working hard with her husband wouldn't get anything. I thought that was inequitable.
But Clive, you know that if Peter Credlin or Tanya Plibersek had a baby, under public service rules, they get full pay for 6 months. That already exists in the public sector. Now, why don't you then seek to dismantle that if you think the whole thing's inequitable?
Well, for me, I think the whole thing's inequitable. I've employed a lot of women who have paid parental leave because our company gives it to them, because it's an employer-employee thing. I don't think it should be something that the government cuts into. We need smaller government. It's surprising the Liberals want to get bigger. We need smaller government, really.
But I'm saying it's already there. But the public sector have got it.
But I think in this case, you know, they should pull it back because of the public sector.
Of course
Why should
that's what
a public servant
Why wouldn't you do
6
that?
months? Why should they?
Well, I think Tony Abbott should, and I think you should take the lead in that, Alan. He listens to you, and you're a person with great skills of convincing people, so let's see you do it.
He's never convinced me of anything. I'll have to disagree with you there for a start.
Clive, you're a businessman.
Yeah.
And businessmen are meant to note the difference between black and red in terms of the figures on a page. You're down as saying, and have I got you right, that you want a 15% income tax cut, you don't want to lift the GST, you want pensions to be increased by $150 a fortnight, you want $80 billion more for health and schools and disability services. Where does that money come from?
Well, I want all those things, and I want a vision for Australia how we get them. And we need to project forward. If we abolish the carbon tax and the mining tax, what then? We've got to create more wealth, and there's a lot of ways that we can do that. First of all, with provisional tax, we can, instead of paying it up front before you've earned the money, businesses could pay it at the end of the year. That would free $70 billion in the forward estimates in the next 2 years, in the next year actually, for the Australian economy. We can have more hospitals, more schools, a rising standard of living, a greater revenue, and more wealth creation. People not moving into more jobs because there'd be
Clive,
more money out there.
everyone agrees with this. We don't live in the ideal world. The International Monetary Fund said our spending is the fastest growing of 17 like countries surveyed, that real public spending, this is the International Monetary Fund, is going to increase by 16% unless something is done to the budget. The World Bank says we're the most expensive jurisdiction in the G20. I mean, here you are saying, and there's a whole stack of them, the more of them say the same thing. The Commission of Audit said if we keep going the way we are within a decade, we'll have to find another $70-something billion. We are going downhill in terms of the gap between expenditure and revenue, and you're wanting to spend more.
Well, that's not right, really, if you look at the overall situation. With the third lowest debt country in the OECD. 12.5% of our debt of GDP. The OECD average is 73%. So there isn't a debt problem at the moment. I know from being in business, the market changes, the mood changes every 3 or 4 years. Of course, we've got a very low base, and that's what we may be increasing fast from a low base, but we've got a very, very low base. There's no need to panic. We don't need to take $15 off our pensioners for going to the hospital twice a week. We don't need to put people in poverty. We don't need to increase taxes like the debt tax, like the Liberal Party's done. You know, certainly
Clive,
the Liberal Party I know is a low taxation party.
If you were driving out to the Brisbane airport, and you're only a couple of miles out of the city,
yeah,
and you're only a couple of miles out of the city, and there are signs up which say accident ahead, and it's flashing to you in a red light, you'd be mugged to keep going. You'd most probably get the car and turn around. Now, what the International Monetary Fund are saying is that our growth in expenditure is the third worst in the world. Only Slovenia and Spain are worse than we are. Don't those red lights say we've got to turn around?
Well, no, actually, we're not in Brisbane going to the Brisbane airport. We're in Tasmania heading for Brisbane. That's the reality of it, you know. And it's all been blown up. And, of course, we don't need to do what we're doing. President Obama in the United States has injected $85 billion into his economy. He's made America stronger.
Clive, he's not your hero, is he?
Country.
He's got $17 trillion in debt. President Obama.
Let's stick to Australia. I think we can stick here. But Clive,
it's not about debt. It's about wealth, Alan. America's the wealthiest country in the world.
Clive, there's got to be some cuts in the out years. I mean, because I actually agree with you and disagree with Alan. I don't believe there's a crisis this afternoon, but I do believe in the 3 to 4, 5 year period you start to get one. How are you going to cut anything from government spending in those years? I mean, what do you say you'll cut? Because something will have to go.
Well, if you look at how I would look at the budget, is a totally different situation. There's a lot of big items in the budget which we can improve on. For example, we're spending $37 billion projected ahead for looking at the new submarine. We could buy an off-the-shelf submarine design, do it for about $10 billion, save $30 billion. That makes sense to me. Our NBN, that's $45 billion or something. It's really there to cover about a $5 billion gap where we haven't got good coverage. We can spend that money on that, save $40 billion on that. Our paid parental leave scheme, which I know Alan loves, would save another $20 billion. You know, it just goes on and on without looking and hitting our pensioners and people that can at least afford to pay it. That's just, why waste all this money? And then we can look at the functions of government, how people work, and no one's looking at that and making it more efficient. Sure, we can do better. We can make our health better. We can make a lot of things better. But in the meantime, we haven't got to panic.
Look, I do agree with you on the NBN, and I do agree with you on the submarine issue. But what I'm trying to say, Clive, and I, as a businessman, I'm expecting you to understand this. We're looking down the track here. Currently, when we look at revenue, we now find that 48% of all the tax-paying units in Australia, by the time you take in welfare transfers and payments, pay no tax at all. 80% of single families pay no tax at all. Now, as you then narrow the widen the base of those that are not paying, who's going to pay down the track?
Well, Alan, that's a very good point. We need to increase our government revenue. And of course, what you've got to realise, the Australian government is the #1 petitioner of bankruptcies and liquidations in this country. And of course, you know, that's taking people from gainful employment where they're paying group tax and providing revenue from the government onto Centrelink. No one wants to do that. Why don't we have a Chapter 11 like they do in the United States, when the business continues, the exports continues, the jobs continues, the growth continues, and of course the owner of the business like me would lose his equity. 85% of all companies going to Chapter 11 emerge for it. No, the Australian government kills our enterprises and kills our companies, and that's a bad thing. We need to change it.
But surely one of the things that kills them, and you know this as a businessman, your biggest bill is the wage bill. That's the biggest bill. Now, here we are in Australia, where our minimum wage is more than 50% higher than Europe, Canada, Britain and New Zealand. In other words, you can't employ anyone full-time on less than $649.20 a week, which is $33,000 a year. There are many young people out there unemployed. There are many people coming out of jail. There are many disabled people happy to work for 20 grand. They can't. Shouldn't that be dismantled?
Well, first of all, our wages are a lot lower than they are in Japan. And I think Japan gets a lot of our resources, has become the second largest economy in the world. For example, we can export nickel ore at $50 a tonne. They process it through at $20,000 a tonne. They sell it in the world market for. And they've got higher wages, higher energy, and they suffer from the tyrannies of distance. Let's get our resources from Queensland and Western Australia. Let's establish those plants with our $1.5 trillion of superannuation funds that are invested offshore and make this country do what it can really do and get the lowest cost downstream resourcing in the world and play to our strengths. That's what we need.
But how much longer can we go on? How much longer can we go on with an hourly minimum rate of $17 here, the USA $7.01, the UK $9.40, Canada $9.80, France $11.70? You know, as a businessman, you're going out the back door on competitiveness with those rates of pay.
Well, I think it's productivity that matters, and I think we've got to look at how we can do things better and maintain our standard of living. Of course, if what you're saying is true, our dollar wouldn't be as high as it is. The investment inflow into Australia wouldn't be as great as it is because people see opportunity here, other people from other areas, and we should be seeing those opportunities ourselves, and our government should be leading us to them so we can be a stronger, better nation, and man can be like he was meant to be, free and independent.
Clive, can I ask you though? You've got these prescriptions. You've got these answers. But I want to ask you about your own businesses, because Coolum is a place that I've been going to since the late '80s. It was one of the great resorts of Australia, with one of the great resort golf courses. You go you bought it a couple of years ago. It had 58% occupancy with Hyatt. It's got 0% today. You can fire a shotgun through the place. You won't hit anyone, guest or staff. Now, what have you done to Coolum?
I've made it a great place for me to live, Alan. You know, it's why work so hard? Sorry, Richo. It's a great place. It's a great golf course, but we've got a lot of people that are there. And of course, it wasn't making a profit any of those years, and it's much more profitable now. And that's what business is about.
But it hasn't got anyone staying there. How can it be profitable?
Well, look, you know, what's the point of having $1 billion if you can't buy something you like? I agree with you. It's a great golf course. I like the restaurants. I love it. It's a great place to be. That's why the people of Coolum, of Fairfax, selected me with 50.3% of the vote to represent them in Parliament. Because they know that I care about them.
You've got a whole heap of unit holders suing you because you basically locked them out. And I mean, it's not as if this is going well.
Alan.
Well, they say that you have. They're suing you.
Of course they do, but they're all from Sydney and Melbourne. They don't like the fact that we've opened the resort up for all the local people to come in. On the 27th of this month, we've got a Fairfax Day where 100,000 people from my electorate have been invited to come to our resort to see an Elvis Presley concert, or the world's #1 impersonator, to see our auto museum, see dinosaurs at night, enjoy the resort. It'll be packed out of people. Why don't you and Richo come up and do a live broadcast? See the dinosaurs, play that golf, enjoy yourself again.
I don't know.
Deserve it.
You see the dinosaurs every day in Parliament, don't you, Clive?
I do, but look, Al, I've just got to say, I've admired you for so many years since you were the Australian coach of the rugby union. You're just a fantastic guy. You've done a great job. And the two of you together have got great chemistry. It's diversity of opinion. It's the battle of an idea. That's what's more important for our country. Ideas. Do you get any ideas from our politicians on any side? Very, very hard. Squeeze them as hard as you like.
All right,
Clive,
we're going to have to get a few ideas in a break because we're going to have one right now. We'll be back in just a second with Clive Palmer. And welcome back to Richo and Jones, where we've got Clive Palmer in our Canberra studio, and Alan, I think, is about to talk to him about the state of Queensland.
Clive, if I could just take you to Queensland, there was once a Crime and Misconduct Commission where those appointed to it, they had to be bipartisan appointments. No one could be appointed unless someone from both sides agreed. That has been changed by legislation, so the Newman government can now stack the Crime and Misconduct Commission. They have now sent you to the Crime and Misconduct Commission. Sini is saying that he has evidence against you that you sought to corrupt the process of government. How do you respond to that?
Well, he made those allegations 2.5 years ago against the alleged event on a Friday afternoon on the ABC, and he said he was going to refer me to the Crime and Misconduct Commission on the Tuesday, the following Tuesday. It was a long weekend. But of course he looked at his file over the weekend and he saw that he'd written to me on at least 4 occasions congratulating me in the transparent manner which I'd carried out my discussions with him on those particular dates. So it was quite clear that he was lying. So rather than report me to the Crime and Misconduct Commission, which would have been a criminal offence for reporting someone that had done the wrong thing, it was innocent, he decided to send my files over and declined to report me. Now, of course, the Crime and Misconduct Commission, Ken Lay, the fellow they appointed, was being interviewed by the Parliamentary CMC Committee, and he lied to them. He was about to be charged with perjury, and Newman changed the legislation to save him, then appointed him chairman. Now he's been investigated by the police. He eliminated the bipartisan
If
nature
I could just
of the
stop you there,
CMC.
because I think in a way you're going so quickly. The point you just made is very valid. In other words, the acting chairman of the Crime and Misconduct Commission in Queensland perjured himself before a parliamentary committee, in other words, told lies about the extent to which the Newman government had approached him to write a beneficial story in the newspaper flattering of the Newman government. He denied that had happened until a Newman staffer, also called before the parliamentary committee, actually had to acknowledge that he had approached this fellow, Lay, to write that story. That man is still the head of the Crime and Misconduct Commission.
Well, what happened was the Premier and the Parliament dismissed the Crime and Misconduct Commission.
We've got you. Keep going.
And he dismissed them, and then they changed the Act to take away the bipartisan nature of it, so that the Premier now can veto investigations and he can run them. The first thing they did was try to take an allegation against me for political purposes.
Well, let me just take that point about the allegation against you, because I was just checking the correspondence. It's true, isn't it, that Sini wrote to you on April 20, 2012, on May 9, 2012, Newman wrote to you on September 20, 2012, Sini wrote to you on September 12, 2012. That showed the state government and all of those very flattering and willing to deal with Palmer and your company. Indeed, Sini said on April 20, I congratulate you for your efforts to date, which are contributing to the long-held vision of the Galilee Basin becoming a major new resource region. Sini said then, subsequently, 2 years later, he wanted special treatment. He wanted us, our government, to act inappropriately. Yet you've there is correspondence in December of 2012 where Sini says, Dear Clive, I reiterate my preparedness to meet with you personally on a regular basis, and I value the progress we've made on repairing the relationship between your company and our government. That's a letter in December. He is saying 6 months previous you attempted to corrupt the government.
Well, that's true. Of course, what really happened was that he wrote to people that spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the Galilee Basin, stopped their project, and gave the project to an Indian company which had been fined 200 million rupees by the Indian government for trying to corrupt their government and doing wrong things in India.
Did the Indian government stump up money to the Queensland government in order to be preferred ahead of you?
I don't think so, but I think someone may have stumped up money to somebody. And it wasn't just me, it was 5 other people. We won an open tender, myself and 4 other companies, with the open tender with the Bligh government. And then we've discovered in a court proceeding a minute from the North Queensland bulk ports where the Premier says, because GVK has told me that these other companies are interfering with it, I want to cancel their approvals. Not for the good government of Queensland. But this has been going on for a long time. It's a sad state of play for Queensland. I'm very sad that I've got a Deputy Premier who's a liar. I'm very sad that I've got a Crime and Misconduct Commission who's more like a Gestapo. And it's not just me. I'm the least of the people to worry about. There's so many citizens of our state which have lost their rights, that have been held in detention by police, that have been, the whole laws have changed in Queensland. People don't realise what's gone on. And of course, the debacle, how the judiciary and the separation of powers, it's just a terrible situation.
Why, this is a very valid point. Why isn't the nation concerned? I see this as one of the worst forms of government that you could run to. Now, here we've had a Chief Justice just appointed from the Magistrates Court. This is a bloke from Millmerran who was a meat worker and then became a cop and then did a course in law, and he's never appeared, as I understand it, in any major case anywhere. You've got the Solicitor General saying, look, you're not qualified, I'm resigning, you should decline the commission. Why has this bloke been appointed by Newman as Chief Justice of Queensland, and why is the Attorney-General Bligh now running around telling everybody in the Parliament, this is the way, if you get criticism, you answer that criticism? You smell a rat here, don't you?
Well, I certainly think it's unusual to appoint a Chief Justice. It's not for the Supreme Court. I don't know about the individual concerned or that he's ever done anything wrong. We've got to make sure we don't just attack him so much as attack the process and what's going on. And certainly Newman has been very, very critical of the judiciary in his time as Premier, because after all, it's the judiciary that stands up for those things. But one of the rarest commodities in life is political courage. Not many people have it, and you exhibited it, Alan, on your radio program about this issue. You took the lead, calling on a Royal Commission. And I know when our senators take their position in the Senate in the next couple of weeks, they'll be pushing for a Senate Select Committee of Inquiry into what's been happening in Queensland, so that the people of Queensland can come forward and tell their story, so Australians can know what's really happening and appropriate action can be taken. We've seen a whole lot of situations happen where, you know, chief of staff of people like Senior have become lobbyists for companies. There's been a lot of money paid to those companies, and there's been Queensland people and Australians that have missed out. And this has gone on right through the state. Now they want to sell our hospitals and sell our schools so that to their lobbyist mates to make money. And really, I think people have got to stop it. I've been the person trying the hardest that I could, and you know what City did to me and how they were trying to set me up is a good example of what's happened to so many Queenslanders that are much more important, don't have the means to defend themselves than I do. Well,
you certainly do, Clive. But look, I've got to ask you a couple of other questions, because I can't pick up a newspaper without you being criticised. I mean, you're getting a bucket a day. Now, I've been getting a bucket a day for 40 years, but sometimes there are easy ways to clear it up. Now, one of the things that I keep reading about, and I think all of Australia knows about, is the fact that you are allegedly building the Titanic. But no one can find a shipyard with which you've signed a contract. No one can find a shipyard where it's being built. So now clear it up for everybody and just tell us, where is it being built? What's the name of the shipyard?
Well, the shipyard's Jinling, and of course we've had a press release out from them, and the press have been up to see them, and we were #1 on the world's Twitter when we announced it, and they're in China. Of course, you know, when you build the original Titanic, it took about 7 years to design and get everything ready to go. It's taken us about two and a half years to get that. We're dealing with a team of international architects, shipbuilders, marine scientists, a whole range of people to get the Titanic underway. And we hope to lay the keel down later on this year. And that's what we're doing with the Titanic. It's been going that way ever since. But I'm being criticised by a lot of people for a lot of things. Most of them are not true, because the status quo in Australia, they don't like the fact that someone's come from nowhere and now holds the balance of power in the Senate. And a lot of people are not comfortable with that.
All right, but just to be specific, you've signed a contract with Jinling and construction. Has construction started?
No, we're planning to lay the keel down later on this year, and we're looking at about December. We're at the moment looking at building the cabins on shore. We want to build the cabins first to make sure that we're happy with them before we put them in the final ship.
All right.
It's a lot harder building the Titanic today than it was 100 years ago.
Well, it didn't work too well 100 years ago, but it works better this time. I just move on, because your business interests are always being criticised. And it's interesting that you're talking about China, where you're building the Titanic, or about to build the Titanic, you say. And of course, it's from China that most of the criticism comes, in this company called CITIC. Now, again, I read the papers, and there's supposed to be $12 million taken out of an account during the last election campaign, and CITIC are basically claiming you knocked it off. I think that's, I mean, it's a crude way of putting it, but I think that's what they're saying, you knocked it off. Now, what happened to the $12 million?
Well, that money's, the particular $12 million you're talking about, is in the account. It's available to them at any time. It's a surplus of funds that are in there. Of course, they haven't paid us for hundreds of millions of dollars of iron ore that they've sent back to China, and they think they can take Australian resources and not pay for them. So I'm a person that's got enough money to be able to fight them in court. They're owned by the Chinese government, and their modus operandi is just not to pay their bills, and most Australian companies can't afford to take them to court. They just go bankrupt. But I wasn't prepared to do that, because I believe in the integrity of our sovereignty, and I believe in standing up to the Chinese that wanted to do that.
But you say that, Clive, just a sec, Clive, you say that, but I also read now that because of what's happened in the federal court, the police are investigating this $12 million.
Well, no policeman's ever contacted me, and there's no complaint that I know, and I think this is just another beat-up by Hedley Thomas, to be honest with you. It's just fatuous as far as I'm concerned.
So as far as you're concerned, there's no problem with any of this?
I don't think so. There's no complaint. I'm not under any charges. There's no legal action being taken against me. But of course, I've commenced legal action against Mr. Sini today, and that hasn't been reported.
How long were you a member of the Liberal Party, and are you a life member of it, or were you?
Well, I first joined the Country Party in 1969, and in 1992 I was made the youngest life member of the National Party. I'd been the party spokesman in the 1986 election, And of course, when they merged with the Liberal Party, I was automatically made a life member of the Liberal Party. I then became a delegate to their federal council. It's about 40 years or more.
So the reason I just asked you that question, do you think that they're frightened of what you know?
Well, I know quite a bit, Al, and I know a lot of the people because I've had a long-standing relationship with many of them. But I think you can't attack individuals. You have to look at the policies and the ideas. I'm 60 years of age. For whatever reason, I find myself in Parliament. And, I had a good conversation with some palliative care nurses, and I asked them, what was the one thing that people regret when they're dying? And they said that it was not being themselves and not saying the things they could have said. I took that advice on board, and I've decided to come out of my cocoon and say what I think's right for the country.
I've never thought you as being in a cocoon. I want to ask you one last question then. Ricky Muir, I saw the Mike Willesee interview. Now, I understand ordinary citizens getting elected to the Senate, and I understand most ordinary citizens don't understand all there is to know about politics. But this bloke got elected 9 months ago, and he turns up a week ago absolutely unable to answer anything. How can you be that hopeless, and are you proud to have him in your team?
I'm certainly proud to have him in my team because he's a person of integrity. What you do is far more important than what you say in our life, but we put a lot more emphasis on what people say. Now, I had an hour-long interview with Mike Willesee. He's quite serious about politics. That wasn't shown. He did interviews in the United States dealing with people very high up in the US administration that have worked with me internationally, and they spoke favourably about me. That wasn't shown. He was only looking for a story. It was a very biased piece in my point of view. But Ricky Muir has got 5 kids. He works in a sawmill. He can't afford to take 9 months off to prepare for the Senate.
No, he doesn't have to take 9 months off. He can read a newspaper,
He needs the money
Clive.
for his mortgage.
No, he can read a newspaper. It's not that hard.
Well, I think, for you, Richo, extremely talented guy in the media, someone like me that's experienced going on television, it's easy. But for someone like him, it's never been on TV. You get a bit of the nerves, and he just wanted to have a glass of water.
He certainly had a big dose of those. Clive, he's now going to have a say in how I live, how I work and how I play, and that scares me.
Yeah.
If he's honest, it'll be a lot better than some who are there.
Well,
I can tell you. If he's honest, it'll be a long way ahead of some who are there.
Yeah, it helps.
Well,
it helps
at least you know Ricky's name. Could you name me the 12 New South Wales senators, Richard?
No way in the world. Most of them no one's ever heard of. I think I'd stop at about 10. But look, Clive, I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there. I'm over time.
Unrepresentative swill, they said. God bless you both.
No, that's not right. I was a senator. I was definitely not unrepresentative. I was definitely not swill. Thank you, Clive. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Clive. Thank you for your time.
Clive Palmer in Canberra, and we will have to go. We're back in just a sec. Well, thanks for your company here on Richo and Jones. The old Clive Palmer did pretty well.
I thought he did very well. The one thing about Palmer is he's not stupid, and he's got a few guts.
Well, I'm going to check on some of the things he said, and
Sure.
I'll report next week. Because there's always a controversy about him, and now we've got a name of a shipyard. We'll get on to them. I'll find out exactly where this is up to.
I think his problem is that he was so erratic, politically erratic, that he lost credibility. The stuff about Credlin, the stuff about I want more office staff, I want the status of a minor party.
Oh, and Wendy Dunn's a Chinese spy and
all that stuff. And that you lose credibility. Now, you've got to rebuild all of that. But if he does that and uses his mandate in the Senate sensibly, then Australia could well be better off, because he's not stupid and he's able to see issues with some clarity. And I think the fact that he's a bit different, people quite like. Let's be honest. He's just not one of those boring people who makes these platitudinous comments that drive you nuts.
But see, even you just said, if. I mean, this is all very iffy. What if he doesn't do that? Well, what if he uses that power badly?
Yeah, I'm not interested in sort of getting the crystal ball out and looking into the future. I'm just saying, well, let's wait till July 1 and he'll be under the microscope like everybody else. But he has a golden opportunity to deliver and to build some credibility with the Australian people. And if this holds some of these people down there to greater account than currently is the case, well and good.